Disney Lorcana was released exactly 5 weeks ago, which is actually insane to even consider that it's been that long and that we're already this deep into chapter 1, and before we know it, chapter 2 will actually be here. So this felt like a good time to talk about the most expensive cards in the game. Now, in this particular video, we're going to be covering the most expensive cards at a given rarity, but also looking at the overall landscape of all of it. Should be a lot of fun. Might have some head scratchers in all honesty, but there's a lot of really common sense to it all once you really figure out why a certain card might be more than even a more playable or better card once you understand everything that's going on. Let's get right on into the video today. Simba, Protective Cub, is the most expensive common in the game. And there's several reasons for this. But before that, today's market value or the market price on TCG Player is $1.14. But you can see on this list that there was points in time where the card was at market almost 225 and even at a foil version at 550 or above. What's crazy for a period of time for this card, if this is your first time you're actually hearing about, Simba and everything that he was doing, there was a point in time where this little itty bitty common was going for over $5. And it might have only been for a few days, but anyone that was kind of like holding out on selling their commons, if all they had to do is log in that day, see that there wasn't like even 20 of these on the marketplace, and see that the prices for them were like 450, 550, some were actually even like $6. And they could have got away with selling this common for more than $5 in a single pack. So for a point there, it was absolutely unbelievable the price of this card, but it's cool to see now that it's kind of leveled off. I think most of the listings right now are actually a little below the market value, which is 114, but you're still going to be able to probably get $2 for this card if you're a certain level seller with a fair amount of sales, which is absolutely insane to consider for a common. Why? Well, it's not in the Amber Amethyst starter deck. It's one of the most played commons at its ink and in every deck that its ink is a part of. It's really hard to deny what a 2-3-1 Lord Bodyguard can give you for 2 cost. And I think that's a key factor. But let's look at the other commons in this space and what he is actually representing amongst all of commons in general. So as you can see here, at market value, he's actually nearly double the cost of the next 7 playable cards. And that's exactly what all these are. They're all quite playable. None of these are in the starter decks, which is another key factor. A lot of the times in common specifically, with the fact that we got 3 different starter decks covering all 6 inks, these particular cards not being in the starter decks, I think aside from Gaston, I feel like Gaston's actually in the starter deck, but I might be wrong and misremembering. It's been a while since I actually played with starter decks. But all in all, these cards are so far apart, and that's what makes Simba even more special because being literally double the cost of the next common just makes every single pack you open with Simba that much more valuable, knowing that if a MSRP pack costs $6 and you open a Simba who's over $1 in market value, that means your pack just cost you one less dollar right from the door, which is really fun and really remarkable to see. All in all, not shocked by any of these commons. These are some of the most playable commons in the game, at different for each ink. In all honesty, the only ones that I cover here are Sapphire, and that's because most of the Sapphire playable commons are all in the starter deck. So there have to be cheaper by design because they're just so easy to get 2 or 3 of them at a given time. These, on the other hand, not as easy to come by, not as easy to find, and they just hold a little more weight because they're also seeing play in so many different decks across so many different inks. All in all, pretty interesting to see Simba this far and above the next card. It's actually kind of remarkable to see this much more over, for example, like the Tinkerbells or even the Goofy for what it's worth. I didn't forget, Maleficent is absolutely in the Amethyst Amber starter deck, but that just proves how good that card is and how much demand there is for that card because everybody that wants to play Amethyst, it's the most playable ink. They need Maleficents and they need 4 of them. So this card at, what is that, 22 cents market, pretty astounding for a starter deck common in all honesty. The most expensive uncommon is Flynn Rider. Flynn sits market value at 303 with a cold foil at 512. But as you can see here, the numbers on this are actually kind of insane because at a point in time, Flynn was going for over $5 just for an unfoil version, and the foil was going for over $10 at an uncommon state. You can see it's definitely leveled off a little bit here at the $3 mark, but in all honesty, you still might be able to, as a top end seller, to sell this card for $4 or $5 a pop just because of how necessary he is. Again, this is a card that's not found in starter decks. It's a card that's basically in every single Emerald deck, and there is a theme with the uncommons. A lot of the uncommons that you're going to see here are playable uncommons that just aren't in starter decks. But this one is really interesting to note that at literally one point, uncommons, which you get 3 uncommons in a pack, if you're able to open the right ones, you're able to get insane value. Again, at $3 market value. So if you can open a pack that has Flynn and Simba, that's already $4. That means your pack only realistically cost you $2 in terms of value. And listen, and I hear, not everyone's a seller, right? And I totally get that. So not everyone's gonna actually be able to sell these cards. So instead of looking at it like, oh, I can get $1 for this, or I can get $3 for this, I look at it the other direction and say, oh, I saved $1, or oh, I saved $3. I don't have to purchase that card now because I opened it and I was able to make my best out of my, out of the 12 cards in my booster pack. That's what Flynn's representing here at a $3 market value, which means most sellers are probably selling this for $4 or $5, and you're only really able to get it from sellers below the curve trying to make their sales. And that's all the risk that you need to be willing to take or not to take. Do with what you want. It's up to you. But the point is that a lot of these cards that are listed will very easily go for over $4, including shipping, etc., which is pretty astounding. Let's take a look at the rest of the uncommons, though. So as you can see here, there's a pretty large gap between Flynn and Goofy Musketeer. We go from 45 cents for Goofy Musketeer all the way up to 257. And granted, if we look at the market values here, we have 61 cents and then 312. And that's just such a large gap. But even for, Flynn to Cheshire Cat, it's almost a full dollar more than Cheshire Cat. And they're both kind of the same thing. They're both an Emerald uncommon that go in just about every Emerald deck. But for some reason, Flynn is hedging its bet at $1 more than Cheshire Cats. Again, I believe all of these cards cannot be found in starter decks. The only one I'm not certain of is Eye of Fates. Is the Eye of the Fates. It might be the only one that's in the starter deck. Again, I can't remember specifically if that card is in there. I actually am leaning towards that it's not, but I didn't double check before we started recording. The rest of these cards can't be found anywhere. And it's really shocking. Honestly, the most shocking one to me here is Donald Duck, because I can tell you that Donald Duck can definitely sell for a couple dollars. So seeing it market value at only 66 cents actually feels really low. I feel like even this week we were selling Donald Ducks at $2 a pop. So maybe it's just on the rise as more people are finding room for it in different decks. But the top 3 cards here, and honestly, even the top 4 cards, they're not really too shocking to me. Elsa was a card that we assumed would end up being the most expensive, most expensive Amethyst uncommon, and it is. We were also expecting it to be one of the most expensive uncommons, period. Obviously, it's being a little bit outclassed by Flynn and Cheshire Cat at this point, and it might just be because people are finally catching on to the Emerald style, and now these cards are in a little bit more demand than they may have been at one point, where everyone that was already on the Amethyst Ruby train were buying their Elsa weeks ago, and now they're just kind of just overstocked at this point. But I mean, $1 for Elsa is still nothing to to caulk at or anything like that. So it's still nice to have, still nice to see. But in the end, it is a little shocking to see this giant gap between the top 8 uncommons going from 66 cents to 312. Giant gap for uncommons, but it's really cool to really see that I mean, there's a lot more uncommons in these 8, which means once you go below Goofy, you start getting like into the 50 cents or less range, which for what it's worth in most games is a pretty average cost for commons and uncommons at a good, at a good rate. So kind of take it with a grain of salt of where it is and what these cards are most playable. the first 3 cards, they're playable in mostly every deck for their ink. The next couple cards, Eye of the Fates has been seeing more and more play recently from the results from last week, which is why this card might be on the uptick. You've Forgotten Me is a card that's really situational and only certain decks should actually be playing it. Donald's not seeing real love anywhere, but it might be just because people aren't utilizing the bodyguard mechanic enough, and this card might be another card that might go up in value as we gain, more and more information. Befuddle's another card that is situational. Not every deck is going to play that card. And then Goofy is really only played in one deck so far, maybe two. But those decks haven't been successful, so therefore not necessarily that necessary. And it is a factor, but you can buy the promo version of this. It's obviously way more expensive, but for people that are interested in only buying the most exclusive version of a card, then they might be targeting Goofies. Another really interesting thing that I want to point out real quickly is the difference of cost for certain cards. Players, if you look at a card like Flynn Rider and we say, okay, Flynn Rider is a $3 uncommon on average, that's fine. But then you look at Goofy at 66 cents. Well, the foil for Goofy might only be $3. So the average player might be comfortable just paying for 4 foil Goofies and upticking their price for their deck just because they're like, oh, I don't mind paying $3 a card for a foil. So that really comes into play, I think, at a lot of the common and uncommon range. It's obviously a little different when you're talking in legendary aspects where it's like, oh, if a legendary is $60, but the foil is over $100, well, that's a big difference in cost of product. But when you're going from 60 cents to $2.50, it's a lot less. Some players are more interested in spending the low increments to, pimp out their deck earlier and things like that. I think that could be attributing to some of the cost of these cards as well. Let's get into the rares. The most expensive rare is Cusco, which really shouldn't be a shock to many. This card is absolutely phenomenal, but you can see here the market price currently is $13.94. The cold foil market price is $18.73. Now, this is the first one that actually it kind of blows my mind that the foil market price is so very cheap. And I think the real core reason for this is that people just weren't valuing foils very well at all. As you can see, just start, from 823 to 91, people were valuing foils for less than what cards were able to be than what the non-foil version was purchased on September 2nd and 3rd and things like that. And anytime that's happening, it's just because the range is not right. And I think people were definitely overselling foils early. If you were able to get your foils early, you probably saved honestly a bunch of money because some of the difference in values of these foils is like remarkable. And this is one of those examples that you were able to get 4 foil Cuscos for under $15 each, probably at in the first 2 weeks of the game. Now, obviously, they're sitting much higher. The average is 18, but I would be shocked if you saw many that were below 25 in general. But this is probably on average foils. You only get 24 in a box. So the concept that players are or that sellers are selling these cards, these foil versions for so cheap is kind of remarkable because they're eventually going to dry up and just not exist and be harder and harder to find. And I don't think it's worth selling foils that cheap when they're just not a lot of them. Like 24 in a single box isn't a lot of foils to talk about, even though it is a full number pack, which is nice. But at 204 cards at the explicit rarities on the most playable cards, the foil versions of those cards should just be worth at least at the minimum double of what the card is going for. So this card being a $30 foil makes way more sense to me. But all in all, you can see the track record here for Cusco. Huge spike on 9.2, which is covered in a previous video. If you want to hear about why the prices spiked on that, you can check out the video here. It'll be in the pinned comment as well. It's done by Scott. But all in all, Cusco, probably the best rare in the game. It's arguably one of the best rares in the game. It's really hard to not see this in every single Emerald deck as opposed to some of the other cards on this list that we're going to see in a second. And that's why I think that it is the way that it is that at the end of the day, best rare in the game. And it's an automatic play in so many versions of Emerald decks. So their supply and demand in itself. If you're playing Emerald, you need this card and you need 4 of them. So the other debate here is the rest of the sum. Now, as you can see, the market price for Cusco is $14.08, and then the market price for Lantern is $5.48. Pretty large gap. But the real truth here is just the cards. The closest comparison that I can find, in all honesty, is Cusco and Hans, and that's because most, if not all, Emerald decks would be playing both of those cards. And like almost as a necessity is that if you're playing that color, you should be playing those cards. The other card here that's debatable is Let It Go. The fact that Let It Go is not a starter deck card and it's basically should be a 4 of in every Sapphire deck. It's really hard to debate not playing 4 of it as a hard removal song that you can just sing for free and things like that. So that's another card that I actually be look out for. I think that that might end up hitting at $10 as well. But cards like Be Prepared, Lilo, Maui, Maleficent Biding Her Time, and Lantern, they're not every deck cards. Like, yeah, there's certain strategies that absolutely love these cards. And in all honesty, the seeing Be Prepared now down in market price at 10.03 is quite shocking. At one point in time, that was like a $20 card, and it was only $20 because it was basically in the most played deck and in the best deck that you're able, like, you needed it if you wanted to play that deck. Now, I think it's dropping off a little bit because people are realizing that the play outside of that deck is very low, so the demand for it is a little bit less. And if you are, specifically if you already have it, if you don't already have it, you're probably not interested in playing that particular deck, which means you're not, it's harder to sell that card right now. Lilo is the same thing. Like, Lilo is a very one-dimensional card. You're only going to see it in certain lists, so therefore not everyone needs it. But even then, its power level is so good because Amber is so like great in the metagame currently that you're going to find a lot of decks that do play this, a lot of aggro decks that are end up playing this. It splashes well, with Emerald, with Amethyst, and things like that. But it's interesting to see the very same card in Binding Her Time not anywhere close to Lilo. I don't really have an answer for that, in all honesty. Now, Lilo has been successful, with Steel, with Amber, with Steel and with Emerald a lot more than Amethyst is showing in its aggressive versions. But there's definitely a debate to be made that if there was a more aggressive version for Amethyst to go out there and play, that it should be considering Maleficent. I just don't know that we actually have seen that list whatsoever. And honestly, a card like Lantern, it's really only played in very small decks. So it's interesting to see that it even be, above a $5 card, because aside from being in the winning deck of PPG Denver a few weeks ago, we just haven't seen much of the card at all, and it hasn't necessarily been too successful outside of it. So I don't know if that's just like playing to the information of people just picking up lanterns. It's really hard to say. All in all, the rare spike here, the difference isn't that large. It is only from 5 to 14. So I mean, it's still pretty large. I'm sorry, I guess I'm a little off there. It's about $9 difference on certain rares here, but it's really interesting to see the developments of this over it. Again, these cards just aren't particularly shocking to me. They're very playable cards within multiple decks or within a specific niche deck, and which is nice. If you're enjoying this information so far and you haven't yet, hit that like button on the video. Also, if you haven't, hit subscribe. We do finance videos like this all the time. This is actually my first time doing a finance video. Normally, you find Scott on here doing his best finance. He's way more advanced at these things, but I'm doing my best to deliver the information this week. And I hope you guys are enjoying it. Let me know in the comments what card you might be shocked about seeing is one of the most expensive cards at a given rarity. Let's get to the super rares. I don't think it's a shock to absolutely anybody that Tinkerbell is the most expensive super rare. It's the best card in the game, guys. No questions asked. You're never going to convince me otherwise. This card is the best card in Disney Lorcana, and it warrants its price. Ironically, seeing the market value of $25.44 is just because in the beginning, you can see that this card was at one point under $20, which was remarkable to me. People were just flooding the market at a very low cost and basically just giving Tinkerbells away. This is honestly a card that I expect to only go up in value. The market price is currently at $25.44. I can tell you that we sold out of these this week at 31 in our store. So it's a card that will only keep going up. It'll only keep rising. It'll only keep getting better. Even in set 2, where there's cards that look like they interfere with this, this card is still going to be one of the better cards in the game. I would be shocked if it gets replaced in decks, in all honesty. So it's a card that is worth purchasing now because I only believe it's going to go up in value. The foil versions of this is another one. Like the idea that this like hasn't reached above 40, like above $50 in a foil market price absolutely blows my mind. If you like for me, if I can spend $35 or $40 on foil versions of this, I would much rather just be buying them at foils than spending $25. Like it's totally worth the extra $10 to me to purchase the foil version. It's actually a really nice foil. The other big thing that might be playing into it is the fact that there is an enchanted foil enchanted fairy. So that could be playing into the price of the overall version of this foil. Hard to say. I don't know how many people are really going to suit up and play with enchanteds now that you're seeing the extreme cost of them and hearing that they're kind of easily, taken from near mint to like lightly played or even moderately played through sleeves, unless you're double sleeving and things like that. So maybe this is just a cause and effect of early on they were just selling this card way too cheap and the market is low on it. I think it's the best card in the game, and the best card in the game's price likely only continues to grow if the supply just doesn't keep coming. So if you haven't picked up your Tinks yet, I think right now they're all under $30 on TCG Player. Like, just go buy your Tinkerbells, get your playset, and move on. So a lot of the rest of super rares are quite interesting. Obviously excluding the oversized Mulan because we can't play with that card. The prices here are, you know, they're pretty wide, right? I mean, if we really look at this list, you go from a 20, almost a $25 market price of Disney of like if we look at this and you go from almost a $25 price on Tinkerbell to a $2 price on Aurora, well, tells the tale of super rares. There's 18 of them. This is looking at 11 of them. And two of the more playable ones on this list, you get in the starter deck at a foil. So that's telling you something. That means the other 7 cards are legitimately worse than cards that you get in a starter deck as a foil, which I think is really fun to look at. But, Tink, A Whole New World, Rockstar Stitch, Ariel, and even Hans are all being played in the same deck. They're all super rares, which is really what's kind of creating the expensive version of that deck, is that you need honestly 3 or 4 of all of those cards in your deck right there. And if you just do the math real quick, it's $100 for Tings. It's, another $60 for Whole New Worlds, another $60 for Stitches, another $40 for Ariels. And all of a sudden you're like, wow, I'm over $200 and I only have 4 cards with the 4 copies of them and things like that. So that's why that deck in particular is so expensive right now, because all of the cards that you need for it are just super rare or, really good cards. But yeah, it's really interesting to see the difference here in the gap. Obviously, the power level exists. Tinkerbell being what she is, Rockstar Stitch being what he is. Ariel Singer is a kind of anomaly. That card was at one point below $5. It's now almost $10 market. Genie is another shocking one. This is a card that is definitely seeing play, but I'm not even certain that it's like in necessary evil in every single Emerald deck. Could be debatable. It's fine, but I don't even think you necessarily need him to win games within the strategy. And the rest of it just fills out itself. Robin Hood is the most shocking because it's a card we really just haven't seen much of at all until very recently. And it's maybe a card that if we get more and more reports of Sapphire succeeding, it goes up. So it might be worth picking up the Robin Hoods if you haven't yet, because it's a pretty cheap value on a super rare that definitely has the chance to go up in value. The Queen's not shocking, and Hans is really not shocking. Each one of those cards has the potential to go up, but it's very likely that I think they're going to stay at that level. A Whole New World, honestly, is a card that I think, as crazy as it sounds, might actually drop in value. We'll have to see what that happens there. Everything else here looks pretty even and pretty fair. Very large gap, obviously, out of the super rare slots. You normally get, on average, 12 to 14 super rares in a given box. So when you start considering that, like any box that you get a Tinkerbell in, Tinkerbell is a $25, $30 card, your box costs $150. Well, that's 20% of your box on just Tinkerbell, which is really nice. If you're able to get a box at MSRP and you look at the prices here, you normally get 12 to 14 super rares. If you're able to get the top 4 super rares, that's $70 in value that you're just getting off the cost of your box. Actually, a little bit more, right? So it's 25, 35, 45, 55, 60, $70. So yeah, if you get a box at $150 and you get these 4 super rares up top, and there's still 10 more super rares to go, or 8 more super rares to go, well, you've already, your box already kind of paid for half of itself. So you can see that if you're able to acquire boxes or packs at an MSRP value, it's definitely very great for saving on cost overall, to remove, having to buy singles and things like that. And when in doubt, if you want to try and flip, you might be able to flip the singles and make a little profit on your extras and things like that. All in all, absolutely worth buying product if you can find it. But if you can't, it's also not the end of the world on some of these current prices, because again, the further away we get from more cards coming, which like we just don't know how much we're even going to get between now and set 2. We know we're getting another wave to local stores. We have no idea how much it even is. It's not shocking to me if all of these cards here just keep going up. So might be worth trying to buy right now, as we're kind of in a lull for pricing. Now, of course, none other than the legendary breakdown. This is one of the more comical versions of this game, because the difference in just 12 cards is mind-boggling. Rapunzel is very clearly the most expensive legendary in the game, and there's a bunch of key factors on that. We can see here that the market value of Rapunzel is $57.12, and the foil is $101.22. Now, this is one that I think makes a ton of sense for a lot of reasons. A, it's easily a top 3 card in the game. It's likely the most playable Amber card. It's likely in majority of Amber decks. And there's an argument to be made that if you've seen a deck that's successful that didn't have Rapunzel, it's very possible that it didn't play Rapunzel simply because it didn't own Rapunzel. It's really hard not to just play this card, even if you can't get the full value out of it in any which way. So, yeah, that's what I would be looking at. It's an understanding of this is very likely the best card in Amber. It's possible that it's one of the best cards in the game, and it's definitely potential that it should be in every single Amber deck. And the last note here for the foil version is that there is no enchanted Rapunzel, which means to get the absolute best version, or pimped out version, as people like to say, of Rapunzel, is a foil version of this card, which is why at some point last week, you can see that number, it's over 100 for market value. There was points where they were selling for $140 on TCG Player last week, which is insanity. But that's kind of what happens sometimes when you start realizing some of the best cards in the game. And if you're able to buy a bunch out, like this particular seller did, they were able to buy them all out at like $60 or $70, get them all up, sum them all up, and then immediately flip them for 130, 140, maybe even $150 in some cases, which is remarkable to see. But Rapunzel is no shock here. Her lifeline is pretty interesting. It's basically saying this card was never under $40 market value. It's currently sitting at 57. You'll see most of them go for 65 or 70. If you're able to get them for cheaper than 60, they're definitely worth it. Another card that I just do not see going down in value. The only likeliness is that it will continue to go up in value because it's just that good. And it's going to be really hard to replace this, even with Chapter 2, in all honesty. Let's look at the rest of the legendaries. And in all honesty, have a pretty nice laugh. So you can see here the range is $57.12 for Rapunzel to $3.97 for Gone 2. Now, on average, you're getting 4 legendaries in a box. So when we look at this, and we go, man, if my 4 legendaries include Tikal, Beast, and Gantu, man, do I feel bad. These cards just aren't seeing a lot of play. They're not really making any impact in the metagame. They're not hyper iconic characters that people really need or even necessarily want because of whatever reasonings. Aside from Beast obviously being awesome and having a great art, it's understandable that people just aren't picking up that card to play because they're already filled at their 5 costs with other playable inkable characters, or a card like Cusco that just gets a lot more value more often. So I think that Beast should be a more played card. I've been saying this for weeks. I think Beast is a phenomenal card, and it's definitely worth playing in decks in some numbers. But then you can see that even a card like Ursula, that, at the door, Ursula was really looked down on. She wasn't looked as a particularly good card. She was kind of mediocre and average, but as time went on, it proved that she was a mainstay in any of the Amethyst control decks, and she's very viable and very playable, which is great to see. Players being wrong, which also might attribute to her market value being so low, because there was probably a time where you're able to get Ursula's for like, I don't know, $7-8 on average. She's probably doubled in value over the course of the month because people realize that you actually need that card in decks. The other list here is not too shocking to me. Elsa being really this cheap it's only a tribute to a couple things. I think you've seen a lot of decks that don't play Elsa, and much like Rapunzel, I do wonder if it's like they just didn't own Elsa. And it's not to say that Ruby Amethyst, quote, doesn't need Elsa to be a successful deck, because it's already proven to not need Elsa to be successful. But it's also just as likely as a chance that the deck is just as good, if not better, with her in it. She only adds to the level and ways for you to win the game. So it could be a factor that it's just not showing up in every single deck that people are looking at. Much like Rapunzel, again, I just wonder if that is an actual card collection issue within the metagame in a given area that you're seeing events reported. Belle, on the other hand, really expensive card, really powerful card. Not a whole lot of success in the game. Sapphire just is it's underplayed in the game so far. This past weekend was the first time we ever even really seen true success out of the deck in across multiple events and things like that. So might be a reason why you're going to see that card rise a little bit. It was in a couple of the lists, but not all of them. Maleficent is the other one, another card that people were really down on early. The market price for this card was probably only that way because people were selling this card at like $15-20 at one point, which is crazy. It was always going to be one of the most played cards in the game. Hades is another one that I think people were selling really low that just kept creeping up in value. And then everything else makes a fair amount of sense to me, in all honesty. Mickey Mouse is just not that great of a card for BLT. He's fine. He's an okay alternative to players that don't own Elsa's or don't want to play the uninkable accounts that other players are willing to. You're okay with just saying, I'll just play my inkable Mickey Mouse and move on with life. Carefree Surfer is another one that has continuously gone up in value. It's seeing more and more play in certain Amber Steel decks and things like that. I don't know if it's a meta choice. I don't know if it's a card selection choice. It's hard to argue that this card is better or not than Rockstar, but regardless, you're seeing it show up in play, which is exactly why you're seeing it. Same thing with John Silver, another card that just continuously ends up in a lot of Emerald decks. So the cost of all these cards aren't shocking to me at all. It's pretty basic, run-of-the-mill stuff. That you only get 4 of these in a box. So again, like if you open the bottom 4, you're going to feel bad. If you open the top 4, you're going to feel great. And if you open the middle 4, you're going to be like, okay, at least I'm at where an average that I'm comfortable with. It's just never going to be fun when you're like, yeah, I opened up Taka, Beast, Gantu, and then like a BLT. And you're like, yeah, that feels pretty bad because I didn't get any of the particularly playable ones, and my values on all those are low. So it is what it is when you're playing the kind of like the lottery of legendaries in opening booster packs. Now, let's quickly talk about Enchanted. So as you can see here, the Enchanted spread is quite insane. Going from $717.60 all the way to $182.16 is a very large gap for the cost of these cards. And even just going from first to second, which is the 8 or the 717 to the 302 from Elsa to Mickey Mouse, truly remarkable in difference of cost of these cards. They're definitely not easy to find. Their rarity, I think, is being misleading from day one. The whole 1 in 96 packs thing, I think, is an absolute crock. I can tell you from experience that is not the overall average, and I have opened well over the number that you would ever assume. If you really want to know, hit me up in the comments and you can ask, and I'll give you the answer. But in all honesty, this is just not shocking to me whatsoever. These cards are probably all a bit underpriced, in all honesty. To see a card like Genie on the Job be so cheap, even though it's one of the more expensive super rares, And then to see a card like Mickey Mouse Artful Rogue being more than it actually kind of blows my mind. Same thing could be said for Aladdin. Aladdin being like the ninth cheapest one or the ninth expensive one, whichever way you want to look at that, is like mind boggling because it's probably like top 3 in playability on this list. So that's a bit of a head scratcher for me if I'm just looking in terms of playability. But if we're going off artwork, then hey, I can't. Everyone's opinion is going to be different on those. Personally, I do not like the Artful Rogue art much at all. But I do very much enjoy the Aurora. I do very much enjoy the Stitch and the Tinkerbell. And of course, Elsa's glistening. So can't get away from that. All in all, though, guys, if you enjoyed this content today and you haven't hit the subscribe button, if you're looking for more finance videos like this, we try and do a finance video weekly. And normally it's not my face here, it's Scott's face. So I hope I did a good job. I hope I was able to be informative in the finance world for all you guys that follow all of Scott's videos. Did my best this week. Shorthanded. Scott's on vacation, so I try to take over and do my very best to keep everyone informed of the current marketplace of everything. So thank you guys so much, and we'll catch you in the next video.